Thank you, Jan and Klaus.
Welcome back.
here. Did you enjoy your lunch? Yeah.
Everybody's too full to respond.
I see that. Have you seen, speaking of zoos, the talk just before the lunch break?
Yes.
I've seen a lot of zebras running around.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
A lot of zebras.
Yeah.
And upcoming, maybe a few elephants?
That could be. So please welcome with us on stage, Damien, with his talk about advanced PHP types.
Thank you.
Welcome, Damien. So as a former front-end developer, and then now I switched to the dark side of the force, I'm in project management. Whenever I saw that I had to announce a PHP talk, I became a little anxious because I had no idea how to introduce you. But then we had a little conversation, and it was mostly about, attention, elephants, which has nothing to do with pants for elephants. That's what I thought.
Yeah, that's right. Not an elephant made of pants. That would be ugly.
Oh, not pants made of elephant
Pants
either.
made of elephants.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's endangered species. So yeah.
So all of a sudden, I had a quick conversation with him, and I was no longer anxious at all about introducing him because he's very fun. And with that, I think we're going to hand you over to him, and I'm sure there'll be a giggle or two.
And please ask your questions. And
Right. Submit your questions, please.
I get ready for that. Yeah, so I literally ended up here because I talked the hell out of Robert and probably Sebastian. He's over there for 3 hours about elephants. So if you think that talking about a plush toy will bring you to a PHP conference, that actually works. At least that worked. Of course, he probably wanted to retaliate on me and say, OK, Damien, I know you talk about elephant, but I don't want you to talk about elephant at all. Do something else. So, well, I'm new to the Neos community, so we're going to make a deep dive into the code of Neos, but we are going to dive so deep that we'll go down to the language below PHP, and we're going to talk about types. Hopefully, if you look above, you may see the light and see what you're doing every day. But we're going to talk about types, and just to give you an idea of the fact that we don't want to dive into beginner stuff, I mentioned a few of the beginner stuff that are supposed to be here, but we're not going to be talking about that at all. Okay, intersectional types is anyway way too difficult to pronounce on stage, so I won't do that. And we're going to look at an application just from the type perspective. We're not going to look at the code itself, we're just going to see and to look at the way the types are interacting with each other and how they build something, how they probably give or induce some structure inside your application without you knowing too much, right? Well, we know there are features of types that are very important, and I think we're going to rehearse that a moment. But the type itself will actually put some structure in your code, some hierarchies, dependencies, and stuff like that. And that's what I want you to bring from that presentation. Probably not everything will be applicable to your code tomorrow, but that will probably highlight some features that will probably turn into bugs in a moment. So I already have a nice presentation. What you haven't heard yet is that I do actually static analysis. So it looks like I'm doing a presentation. At the moment, I'm actually auditing 3,000 open source websites, codes. And I usually bring that to turn that into more insight into the code. So I've like 1 billion lines of PHP code under my belt. And over the years, I actually collected some of those tips and tricks in a side project that I have that I call PHP Type Archive. You have the link here. This is not for the faint-hearted. Okay? This is literally ranging from actual useful tips, things that are features underused, downright to actual PHP bugs and completely, cyclic, use of PHP. So be careful in what you're reading there. We're going to use a few of those again, but I will be here to protect you against them. So let's start immediately by making you at work. What do you use types for at the moment? Have you ever thought about that? I mean, usually, if I ask for a count, everyone will say, oh, yeah, we're using types. But what do you use them for? Can you give me a few ideas? Safety. Safety? Like to avoid hackers? Okay, why not? Safety of types, safety of data. What else?
Encapsulate value objects.
Yes, that's a feature. Encapsulate, so put something into something else. Okay, that's a new one.
Fail fast.
Sorry?
Fail fast.
Fail fast, yes, look for errors early. Good. I mean, at least that's one of the points I have. That's still a good point, but it's not in my list. Well, there's a good number of them. Validate data, ensure the color, so kind of documentation, automated integrated documentation. You don't want a string, you want an int, please do that, and I don't even have to pay you for doing that. You'll get an error from PHP. The one that I like also to see, it's help the PHP engine on my IDE understand the code, which is like a tool helping another tool, so it's a bit of a snake eating itself. Also, using semantics value, it's probably the level we are going to work at. Now, this is all valid, but we're not going to look at the code from the type point of view for here. Most of the time, all those typing systems has an impact on the internal of the method, so that's where you know what you want to get, you're going to use it, and then you're going to fit that answer into a special format, and then you're going to push that outside on the return type. That's the body of the method, and we're not going to look at that. We're going to look at the rest. So everything that's coming to this method, and how it's also going to go out. So for that, sadly, I can't start with Neos, because I would like you to think a little bit for a moment, and imagine that you are given an application, a PHP application that is fully typed. Everything that can be typed is typed, so we can use any feature that actually relies on types, arguments, return types, properties. If you're on 8.3, I mean the PHP 8.3, of course, not Neos 8.3, you have also the constants that can be typed. Is that difficult to imagine? Yeah, it's not everywhere. I mean, PHP has a number of elements. Just also to go on with the rest of the presentation, I added a few elements. The most difficult to handle is that I drop everything about interface, extend straight on enum, mostly because it would be too difficult to handle during the presentation. I don't want to go into details about them. That does add some combinatorial explanation, but not for here. And also, we are going to ignore all the scalar types. They just do not exist here. And before we move on, what are the features of PHP that are not typable? Resources? Well, they are typed, but they are very useless. I mean, you can't even use them as a type. I mean, it's reserved, but you can't use them. No, I'm thinking more like an array. It's a type, but, well, it doesn't really give you any details about what's inside. There are other situations, other PHP features that are just completely untypable at the moment, and sometimes you would like to do that. No idea?
Value ranges.
Menu?
Value ranges.
Value ranges? Yeah, that's down to the value. That's one of them. But in terms of PHP features, well, variables, for example, closures, you can't really, I mean, you can give a closure to something, that's a type by itself, but what kind of signature it has, there's no way to type that, unless you go through a class. Yield and the yield from also is just yielding stuff. You can throw back any kind of elements, and there's no way to say, oh, this is going to yield ints, and only ints, and then you can process that for it. Mixed, which a little bit like arrays, is both a type and not a type. Because, yeah, you say, hey, look, it can be a type of any type. So, yeah, maybe you could be specific. And there's also a notion that doesn't really have a name, so I give it the dependent type name, which are probably older PHP features, which depends on the actual value. So if you take str replace, you can replace a string into a string and get a string. Makes sense. You can replace lots of strings as an array into one string into another string. So that's possible. You can replace several of them into one. But you can do the contrary. You can replace one string by several values, which indeed makes no sense. You would get an error. But there's a bunch of them. Array keys will return different things. Plus, you know that you can add arrays, but you can add integers, floats. You can't add strings. And not all of them. But there's a bunch of situations that are not typable. So this application is a little bit strange, but Now let's go into it. We have a fully typed application, but where are we going to go from there? The first question, of course, is that, is there anything that can go wrong? I mean, besides getting type error, I expected an int and you got me a null. Do you get any kind of other errors in PHP with types? No, you don't. OK, so we have to ask ourselves the first question, which is, what kind of error could go wrong? So we're going to start with the beginning, is that given that application, fully typed and supposedly running, can we actually call anything in that application? Can we start? Where do we start with it? So we'll have to dive into the code itself and say, yeah, well, if we start something, we'll have to find at least a class that doesn't rely on any other types. Because if it relies on another type, of course, well, we have a dependency. So at least we have one class that will accept a new, and that should not have any other types. If we do have another type inside the constructor, then of course we'll have to go through the hoops of doing the other class, and the other class will actually turn to, well, being the first one. We have to start by D on the second case, and we can start directly on A for the first one. We have the constructor that actually is this bottleneck. We create an object, the constructor is called, even if you don't have a constructor, by the way. Because if there's no constructor, well, it's still called, not there, nothing to do, that works. No type here, OK? But that also means that as soon as you start adding types into the constructor, you are building a dependency on other classes. One class cannot be the first one, and the other one has to go first, and then well, you get me. And that comes right off the bat, right? There's no other explanation on dependencies. Now, before we move on with, well, we have one, now two. Let's move on. But before, I want to do another detour with this dependency on the classes. So the default one is that if you add a type, then you have to build the other class. And also, what you can do since PHP 8.3 and 8.2, to be true, is that you can use the promoted properties and the new initializers. Everyone is familiar with both notions? So promoted properties is when instead of declaring the property as a separate line inside the class, you put it directly inside the constructor, which means that immediately PHP will create the property and assign the argument to that value. New initializers, now it's now a weird situation, because new initializer means that you can use new D, that structure, as a default value. And PHP, if the value is not provided, will actually create an object for you and fill it there. And there you'll find, again, the little problems we had before, which is that in the default value, you can't use a variable. So you need to be able to create that class with very little argument. Scalars, but here we say we don't want to see them. And that's it. And now we're starting to see another problem, right? Is that our first problem? We have a way that says D must be created before A, but if we want to create A and we have a new initializer, then the new initializer has to go first. And we're starting to have a problem. Now, that's where you switch your hat and get into the mind of a static analyzer who wants to really find something weird. What happens if you decide to create class A that first has the type A as itself? So it's kind of self-referencing. And by default, you say, oh, yeah, and if you don't give it to me, because, you know, the first one, I don't have it, well, build it yourself. How long do I have to loop that until you say, hey, that's going to crash the system? So 6 months ago, I would not show that slide, actually, because that does crash everything until PHP 8.2. Now, luckily, we have people working hard at the PHP Foundation, and since last version, we have now something that inside the engine says, hey, look, we've been trying to do the same thing for 100 times. Yeah, it's time to stop. And it stops. OK? So my advice here, and my job is done, of course, is update to 8.3. Goodbye. So yeah, that's the one. You can actually crash that. Now, did anyone try that? So I would expect, first, no one to try that. Secondly, if you tried, you're probably not going to raise your hand and be in shame, of course. So I will just be the only one, because I tried that myself, of course, to discover how it works, and it crashes. The second thing, because we're laughing about this one, this is very obvious. You're not going to type, the same class as the one you have in the constructor because immediately, yeah, you think about it. On the other hand, you might end up with a situation like that because such short loop can be really extended as much as you can. Oh, I need A, that's going to create B, B is going to create C, and at some point someone say, hey, look, we're going to speed up the process and loop back C to A. And no, that stops. So, organically, you may end up in such situation. At least try it and realize that's very stupid. So before we look back to everything, and we actually found a problem. Okay, well, it's probably a problem of implementation, but there's also a problem of logic here. This one will stay as our problem initially. PHP 8.3 has fixes about that. The only fix you have that can stay for a long time before you get it, is that the new initializer, will only be used if you do not provide any default value. So you can imagine that your application initially always provide this argument. Someone think it's smart, it adds the extra new here, and the next one who's going to remove the default value in the call will end up crashing. So there's different layers of that bugs, and it might hit you very, very far from the beginning. So let's go back to this one. Let's go back to this one and end up with what we have in terms of conclusion. We now have from all our classes in this application, two kinds of classes. One that are first class, that are just initializable. We can start with them, and from them we can start build above. I think I found something like 184 of classes that from a Neo base, just when you do the installation, that you can start with, and then the rest of the system will start picking up. So it's a little one. I just apparently forgot to update this one. But now that we have two of them, we're going to play the same card as the dependency of types, for the crashing of the constructor, and consider that we can actually see the application kind of grow organically and turn into bits, into more complex elements. So here I'm representing classes, and for each classes, there is an arrow coming from another class who's needed at the constructor level. So you will have the easy situations like single class, no need from anything from the outside, just create the object and run it. That's fine. You have the small ones also when there's like one dependency and you build something. And there are also other classes that are actually a lot bigger and that will actually start, compounding problems because it's including a class that itself needs other types. So again, I decided to dwell into the code of Neos. I remove everything that is not from Neos because there's lots of components. I just looked at things that are inside the namespace. And I don't know if it's a good news, but you're going to vote for that. The worst offender I found is the controller context that require 4 external different types. Now, just as an idea, is it big or is it not big? I mean, it's a number, right? I give you something. Is it a lot or is it not a lot? We can play the old meme, right? I've seen worse, okay? So I don't think it's too much. 4 is usually the early cut when you say, oh, that's too many arguments for a method. And
can I say a thing?
Yes, sure.
The
Compounding?
on Neos might be a little bit missing something because we have like a flow framework who uses a property injection via annotation flow inject. That's how we usually get constructor arguments.
Okay.
We could use constructor arguments as well, but that's like the newer style we're currently only using in Neos 9. But I just applaud it because we all hate the controller context, and I'm trying to ban it with Neos 9, and there's still some work to do.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to find it's held that fast. But yeah, okay. So 4 is not that bad. I've seen other frameworks that start at 6 and go up to 9. So that's already quite a lot. Incidentally, I also found 2 classes in the installation that had more than 50 arguments. One has 51 and the other one has 91. I think the 91, is he here? Well, I'm not going to bash Sebastian Bergman because he's not here. But I definitely know the other one is not from PHP unit. He's going to kick my butt when I'm done, right? Anyway, so this is the first one. 4, that's one of them. 3, it's not, again, it's not bad. And there's not too many, I would say, culprit if you want to start looking at that. There's a good number of 2s, but again, there are 2 classes to. Now, this is just the first level. So I compounded that and started looking at what happens and who are the most complex classes when you start compounding them with others. So those types that are requested from runtime, for example, do require other types themselves, and that starts to add up. And you can see, apparently, class control is not that bad because it stays at 4 dependencies, so there's not too many layers after that. But there are others who are actually going up the tree. And that gives you 2 different look at the classes. Some of them are going to be more complex to debug, for example, or even to test, because they requires a lot of arguments just to end up in the just running state. Again, we're still talking about the first call of this application, right? So what do we end up here? If you ever heard about the banana gorilla jungle problem, this is it. Okay, so the situation is simple. You want to eat a banana. So what do you want to do? Well, you want to find a regimen, a banana tree, find a regimen and grab a banana. That's very simple. Except that on the regimen, there's also already a gorilla. So you have to fight the gorilla or sneak a banana, but that's going to be already difficult. And then you realize that after the gorilla is defeated, of course, there's the whole jungle behind it that you also have to go to start defeating. That's a classic problem in the OOP. You think that, hey, just use that method, and there's like 2 parameters, that's very easy. And no, you realize that those 2 parameters requires another 8 arguments and an initialization, and you've been spending the day just calling one method. But at least here we have a good way, I think, to take a look at things inside the code, have a ratio, and say, oh, look, those classes are starting to build different layers. I would say if you reach 10 layers of things, classes calling one another, that's probably bad. Good. Halfway through the presentation, we have made 1 call in our application. Where are we going from there? Second call, right? Yeah, OK. So can we call something else? Let's say we weeded out all those functions that are, all those classes that are, calling each other itself, so they're possible. We can call them, we get objects, several of them. And now we have to call something else. The second thing that will be called is not a constructor. Now we're going to talk about any method, right? So let's start with that. Can we call another method in that amount of things? So I said 200 classes. You have to imagine that the average number of methods by classes in PHP open source software is about 7. The worst offender is something like 1,200. So I'm not going to mention that. But if we have 200 classes and we now have 1,400 methods to call, which one can we call? Well, first thing we can do is reuse what we have learned so far, which is that we have a lot of constructor dependencies. Again, who says types means we need those objects. So we can start with that. Well, B is going to be a parameter, and it's going to tell us that, yeah, we need to go through another constructor, and the other constructor will, again, start that whole tree of things. So that's a method that has some dependencies. But there are other dependencies of types here. Because it's a method, right? So we are inside another class. And the class itself, before we access it, needs a constructor, which, again, is going probably to ask for other types, or potentially. So just to be able to call one of the class, we now see all the list of dependencies. We have dependencies on B through I also. We have a dependency through key. And now we have a way to consider how expensive is a method to be built and called, because that's going to be the first question. The other thing we'll have to see is what the hell are we going to do with D, but we're going to check that afterwards. So first, how expensive is a method? Well, we can just apply the same kind of construct we had with the constructor, and now just look at the one that are coming A from the constructor of the internal class. The constructors of the parameters and we're going to end up with another index. Again, the higher the number, the more complex it's going to be, at least to test or just to create. I don't have any values for, I don't have values here, but I want you just to consider another question, actually. How do you create an object if you're not using new? I just love the silence, you know. No, you've spoken too much. That's cool because the two guys talking a lot are in the same. I can just put there and just, they don't know which one I'm talking about. Someone else. Excellent. That's two of them. Remember, I have 5 of them at home, right? So yeah, it's a bit small. Wake up and unserialize. Yes, unserialize is just a way to grab a string and boof, you get an object. You even go around the constructor. You also just, that's always a fun one. It's part of my tips over there. Generators, okay? You create a function and you input in it, you use yield. And that is not a function anymore, it's a closure. You create an object by writing a function, literally. You don't have a method anymore, it's a closure. That is weird. There's also a number of PHP functions, extensions that do create object directly. For example, PDO fetch object, you can say, hey, look, read something in the database, don't give me back an array, don't give me back a standard object, just fill that inside that, kind of class and hydrate it immediately. Which is a really nice way to say, oh, I'm not going to use the old PHP 3 ways of grabbing an array and then fetching everything inside the constructor, but I'm going to let the engine do it. I think Doctrine is doing that also. You can say, hey, look, select that kind of object from the database and return them directly to me. And Doctrine will actually find that, do the hydration, probably through a new, and then give you the object. I've been using PHP tokenize my whole life until while writing this slide, I realized that there's a new function, it's a static one, that does return the PHP script tokenized as object. And usually the objects are a lot lighter, faster to access, and yeah, much better in general to handle. So that's another way. Yeah, there's clone, there's the cast classically, but I really would like to see PHP also include more of those elements. It would be nice to do like a regex, pereg match, and instead of getting that array, click, let me fill it directly in an object and I can process it afterwards. Would be nice. Anyway, so let's finish that part about code complexity. Actually, let's move that to the other one, and that part is going to be more interesting. How can we use the class D here? We know what's going in. We know all the prerequisites. That's good. But now we want to see how that class D, that type outside, is going to work. And we're not going to look at the block of the code itself. We're going to stay at the type level. And if you look at that, we can make a list of things. Basically, if we take something from K, A, and B, let's just forget the other one, we're going to end up with a D. And so the first question is, what kind of operators do we have on types? Sorry? Inheritance. OK, yeah, that would work. But here we decided we skip inheritance in general. So that does not apply. But that's valid. My question here is that, well, you're probably going to fall back on values, but PHP is doing some type juggling for us, at least at the scalar level. I decide to add a string to a Boolean, and I get an integer. Yeah, after lunch, that's easy. Later in the day, when you're sober, it's fine. But I mean, that's normal. So that's fine. We can do that and live with that. Sometimes it doesn't work, but this is not fun. On the other hand, when you start trying to do that, you end up with an error. You cannot manage class. There's no operator, I mean, in the sense of PHP engine doing stuff like that. We cannot do anything. Of course, I said that, and it is not true. There's a bunch of PHP internal types that do accept things like that. I think it's GMP, which makes sense. It's one of these extensions to handle big numbers. So it's overloaded. The other one that makes very little sense is the tidy extension. So for some reason, tidy extension is something that you use to build clean HTML code. And for some reason, you can get two of those engines and add them. I haven't tried that, but it's in the code. So we need something that exists that's an operator on types that will say, hey, look, I take 2 or 3 types, and I turn that into another type. And what is the engine we have for that? Well, basically, it's a method. It's just a way of looking at the method as another one. Well, we have that. That was an explanation. Well, that was an illustration, but here is a new one. We have a method M that will take B and C as parameter and turns into D. So if you rewrite that, I would say as a chemistry equation, it's like I'm taking 2H plus O, and I get water. I mean, initially, it's not very obvious that you can take 2 gases and burn them into liquid. But this is exactly how it works. I mean, anytime you write a function, you're saying, OK, look, here is a recipe. You give me those 3 there, and I will give you something else. It does look like a chemistry equation. So let's take a look at what we can do with that. At that point, we would like to know if we can write such a method inside our big application. So we know what are the incoming elements. We want to use A, B, and C as a type. And we know that we want to have an output of D. OK, so conception time. Now, at that point, of course, everything is made up, so you'll have to follow me a bit. But this is not the only one. I say we have roughly 1,400 other methods. So let's take a look and see everything else we have, because this is not the only one. We want to write M10, but we've got a whole list of them, and we're just going to look at what is the other operators that are using types and giving us some results. So we want to output D. Our first reaction, of course, is we are going to look at the constructor. So I look at inside the code, check everything. To create a D, I have a need for E. OK, that doesn't really help us, but we have a step. OK, this is the passage obligé, so we have to go through that bottleneck, and we have a method for that. Let's switch the problem from we want to create D into we want to create E. And then I start looking again inside the whole application. And I find 2 other ways that are 2 other methods that are outputting an E, which is the constructor, classic, and some kind of another method that is now using B. And at that point, I start thinking, ooh, I already have another type that exists. The only problem I have here is, again, I have one missing type. So I start again, look now only for G, and OK, I find one a little later. At that point, well, we have the whole list, right? We can say I start with A, give me G. I combine the G with B. That gives me E. And then I have the final type. Meaning that just looking at the types, I found a way, by algorithm, to say, hey, I can combine those types with existing methods and reach the result I have. And it's actually not the only result that I have here. We have answered the question, is it possible to create the function, the method that we have at the top? Yes, it is. I have an algorithm. Second thing, we're now realizing that C is completely useless. Again, this is random data, so you have to believe me. But we also managed to understand that for that particular way, that particular path of combining the types one after the other, I don't need C. So who the hell decided that C was needed at the beginning? But actually, there's another question behind it, which is, would that be the only way to do that? I mean, we're talking about types, right? Types don't understand the values. They just combine one into the other. And we already have written a bunch of methods, operators, that are turning one type to the other. So maybe we can also look again at the code and say, look, if we started from E and we have the G, that's fine. But actually, from C, there is another way to do the same thing. And whenever you have discussions, inside the team, say, oh, yeah, you're going to get me the invoice of the customer, but then you start just from the customer, goes to the address, and then goes to the invoice. No, don't do that. You go through the history. From the history, you get the last one, and the last one will give you the invoice. Now you have to understand which is the fastest, which is the safer, or just understand if actually they are bringing the same value. Because if you have 2 ways to reach the same value, the same type, probably your type system is not covering the data or the semantics that you need. Type systems are not going to do everything. We have a way here to understand the way they work together as a whole system, but they're probably not going to solve every single of your question. In fact, there's a bunch of situations that are extremely difficult to understand, even by following the question and the algorithm I have just mentioned. Here, by white, I used it as a convention. There's one arrow missing. I used it as a convention to say there's void. When we use the previous argument, the previous algorithm where we're following the types and seeing the dependency they have one into the other, and we have a bunch of methods that are requiring no argument and giving you something. How do we use that? I mean, at any point, I can double my whole argument, my whole algorithm, and just call them in between all the time. That would make no use, right? I can always call them. Those would be, for example, a container. If you have a central container and you say, OK, I'm going to need, give me the database. OK, and now give me the PDF reader and give me the printer. Oh, I can just import everything inside and have everything available. This is a void element, right? It just gives you stuff, and you don't have to exactly ask for anything. The contrary is the same. You have a method that does nothing, or at least in appearance does nothing. It just returns void. When are you going to call it from a type point of view? Anytime. You can call it once, twice, make a loop out of it. The type system is completely oblivious of it. If you have a state in that object that needs to be changed, I don't see it here. The type system will say, yeah, you can call that as much as you want. And I don't know if it's the worst offender, but of course, turning an object or a type into itself, again, means that you can loop that as much as you want, and you don't know where you're going. So that might be some extra conditions that we have mentioned from the beginning. Remember, we said all those classes have to be typed and have to be prepared in any case. But we now are running into a bunch of situations that we do not want. We don't want to use void. We don't want to have self-replicating application types. We should at least go to something like another type. That also is this situation where why I wanted to exclude all the things around the scalar types, because scalar types means that you can always type in the name, give that to any method, and get some result. And if you imagine that at some point you have hey that turns into string, and then you've got a gigantic amount of other functions that are accepting strings and returning strings, suddenly the combinatorial explosion is really nuclear. And then the algorithm just say, no, I can't do everything, because you can do basically with, I don't know, 1,000 methods, give them string, then come back, and that will work. Which is a bit of a beginner approach. Like you don't know what to do, just find something that reads a name that makes sense, call it, it works, and then you ship it. Oh, it was not the right one. I have to do another one which has a different name because it has real in the name, and that's the one I should be using. Okay, so at that point, scalar types are a big swimming pool where you pour everything and you can bring back everything. There's no type that helps you drive around this maze. Just anything can come back, and possibly that's going to be wrong. No, I'm not going to do a third core. I think you know now that we can go one after core with the other. Different elements that I think are interesting to see and have in mind, at least in terms of concretization of maybe artifact and situation you've seen. The type system is inducing a number of hierarchies in your code. Okay, not just the hierarchy, as we said, with extend and inheritance, but also the hierarchy based on constructors and the complexity related to calling just one method. It's an easy call. It might be a lot more complex than you have, and we can attach number now to it. Always good to attach number to everything. The gorilla effect is definitely at hand. The other interesting thing I have here is that just looking at the type system, so the names that are used as type, argument, methods, and whatever, gives you a very simple summary of your code. Probably at the moment, if you've never tried that, you're going to look at that and it's going to be a summary very inconsistent. That makes sense. It's my case when I look at my own code, so don't be ashamed of that. But there might be tools that should extract those types and allow us to say, oh, does the type system at least give me a story? Do I understand what is used in the types? And do they give me something that I can understand? And I think that's the most interesting part at the moment of just looking at the type system, until we have PHP that does all the typing that we need, and there's a few holes in the racket, and then we have also fixed our code and organized that in something that is a good fashion. I've got a good list of them. The one that you might have noticed, I skipped everything about properties. There's a whole discussion I have around, is it a property, or is it an argument? Because when you're inside a class, basically all the properties that that class has are automatically argument for whatever method you're calling. It looks like you're just calling one argument, but actually all the properties are available, because inside the method, they are there. So that could be also something that helps you either break a bigger class or maybe reorganize the method and put them at the right place. But there are other interesting things from there which are mostly research and development. So I hope that from there you'll get interesting insights and maybe another look at your own code and your type system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damien. Quick question: Can you make a lot of sound if you've learned anything just now? And is anybody else's brain feeling a little scrambled? Because mine is. First things first, thank you for your talk. It's your own personal NEOS Insect Hotel and tea.
Excellent. Tea.
But we also came with questions.
Oh, we did.
Oh.
And we have got
We have
honey
time.
for the elephants.
We bring presents, we demand answers.
I see a lot of questions are about the elephants.
Yes.
And the first one, very important, if they are really sourced so that you don't need any ivory for it?
Sorry? They are?
Like, how are they sourced? Are they...
Is there ivory in them is the main question. Are they sustainably sourced without the use of animal cruelty and ivory?
Yes. Yeah.
Good.
Perfect.
So they are always vaccinated. And they are, well, yeah, usually, those one at least are raised at home with trisaille. So this is an important one, but at some point in the world, there was one elephant, and that was this one. That's trisaille, which sounds like Übergroßvater for the elephant. So yeah, it's good. And we always call that adopting. So you're not buying an elephant, you're adopting an elephant.
Okay, and that would be the second question. Sounds very important because I don't know who asked this, but where could I get an elephant? I got one as a present several years ago, and my 2 daughters are constantly fighting over it.
Of course. So this is also the way I tested the elephant. So this poor buddy was for 6 months at home with my 2 toddlers, 1 and 3. And once it has resisted for 3 months, I knew I could give that to developers. It was safe. So I do have a small selection of elephants. I've got the official blue one, like that. I think I have 2 of them. And I have 1 collector from Brazil. This one is a different one. This one is for Sebastian, because this is a company that did the elephant for their own. And then they decided that they want to give away some of them for open source contributors from which we were using tools. So there are different ways to do elephants. You can actually go to conferences. Sometimes they give them away. I'm selling them because this is the official elephant and no one wants to take care of that. But conferences give that, companies give that. I know that in Germany there's a lot of companies who have elephants.
He's literally throwing money your way.
No, so the elephant is one of the value. I mean, people will recognize it. I'm surprised. Well, a few people tell me that they have some, but they recognize it. It's the elephant. Everyone knows about it. I remember getting lost, or at least losing my bearings in Barcelona, but I had my elephant, a big one. I had my elephant under my arm, and someone came to me and said, "You're going to the PHP conference." Yes, say, come with me, and yeah, they help me find the venue. So yeah, it's an international symbol.
So it's a pathfinding elephant too.
It helps. If you take the old ones, it still codes a little bit PHP 4, so I would be careful about code review. But otherwise, the recent one, yeah, there's PHP 8 elephant, so that's good. That works.
Very good, very good. So some less serious questions here. What features do you wish for next with typing in PHP?
So which one? The 8 or 9? Yeah, they're coming up. Yeah. Yep. So one of the so in general, from static point of view, static analysis point of view, I like everything that is around cleaning the code. So from the tips I mentioned, for example, you can say a function returns an array. But if you have the bad idea to say I want to return a /array, so you use the full name, then PHP will say there's no such class as array. So this is the kind of cleaning I like to see, and I know that the PHP group has been working on that. Probably not enough at my taste, but a little bit more. During the presentation, I mentioned more things that are turning, old-style arrays into objects, and I also would like to have that as a default feature for PHP.
Very good, thank you. Do we have time for one more question?
We have time for one more question.
Oh, great. So
I'm the timekeeper.
how much do you really have to know about the inner workings of PHP to create performant code? Isn't there a danger to try to optimize code based on half-baked knowledge, resulting in bad code?
Yeah, so no, PHP is doing the optimization, or the group in general is doing the optimization under the hood. I think in general, for example, static analyzers do help a lot for that. The process is you get a static analyzer, and for example, you want performant code. So there will be rules. Execat has 30 of them, and you ask the others, you're probably using PHP Stamp, Psalm, whatever. There's a huge number of them. They will give you ideas about how to do that. But also, the PHP group will look at that. And if people keep on doing that kind of special code to optimize the code, they will start thinking, OK, maybe we need to take a look at that and optimize it. Again, an example I can give you is, for example, array key exists, which for some reason people like to use, has been optimized a lot. So technically, it got its own token and its own coroutine inside PHP. And just using it is now very fast, just because the PHP group managed to find that out. So I don't think you need much knowledge. The basic one and the obvious one is good, and it's being observed in a long-term way of thinking, and it will speed up at some point.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damien.
Thank you.
All right. Yes. And then we have a few more small announcements. We are planning, if the weather holds, to move the drone photo between the next two talks, so between the 3 o'clock and the 4 o'clock talk. We will keep you updated on the developments with the weather, but as long as it's not awful, we'd like to take that chance. And the other announcement is, if you are signed up for a lightning talk, I know you, please show up to the stage upstairs 10 minutes before 5 so they can set you up. And that is it. Thank you so much.
Please don't forget to rate his talk.
There we go.
If you have more personal questions, I'm staying there for the 3 days.
Or about PHP or elephants.
Yeah, of course, personal. Well, this is my family, so it's pretty personal.
All right. Thank you so much.